There's more fantasy tomorrow evening at 8:10 when the famous comic strip hero Flash Gordon finds himself heading for outer space on a perilous rocket ride to the planet Mongo. In 15 minutes, we join Pam Rhodes and people from Norfolk and Suffolk to sing songs of praise at Beccles Quay. Now on BBC One, the news at 6:25 from Moira Stewart.
Disaster at an air show in Germany. "31 are feared dead after 3 planes collide." Hopes rising for the hostages. The Archbishop's man says the time is becoming right for them to be freed. And in Northern Ireland, more violence marks the extradition of an IRA man. Good evening. 3 Italian Air Force jets collided in mid-air at an air show in West Germany this afternoon and crashed onto the spectators. A state official said it was feared that up to 31 people had died, 100 others were injured. It happened at an air base at Ramstein, the headquarters of the United States Air Force in Europe. The jets involved were 2-seater ground attack aircraft, the MB339A. This report from David Loyne in London.
The accident happened as the Italian Air Force equivalent of our Red Arrows, the Frecce Tricolori team, were completing a manoeuvre. After riding spectacularly, the planes divided into 2 groups. The disaster happened as they tried to cross just 200 feet from the ground. One of the planes ploughed into a crowd of spectators. Another crashed into the runway and burst into flames close to the VIP stand. A third plane was dragged to the ground with the 2 that collided. The MB339A trainer is capable of doing 500 miles an hour. The combined closing speed of the collision is believed to have killed the pilots and sent wreckage across the airfield. West German rescue workers joined American soldiers and airmen to cope with a series of fires which broke out. Ambulances with special burns equipment have been ferrying injured survivors to hospital. But many spectators were beyond help. There'd been concern about safety before the air show. Local politicians and environmental groups had demanded the show should be cancelled. One politician accused the Americans of arrogance in letting the show go ahead.
A plane has also crashed at an air show in Belgium. It happened at the Kleine Brugel base, 70 miles northeast of Brussels. The plane, belonging to the Finland's Air Force, lost control during formation flying with another Finnish aircraft. The pilot was killed. It was a second fatal crash at an air show in Belgium in recent weeks. Hopes are rising that the British hostages held in Lebanon could soon be free. A British diplomat, David Reddaway, returned home from Iran this morning, and it looks as though diplomatic relations between London and Tehran could be restored within weeks. Iran is thought to control the men holding Terry Waite, John McCarthy and Brian Keenan. A Church of England envoy, Bishop John Brown of Cyprus, is in Beirut trying to find out more information on kidnapped Iranian citizens. He says that he's optimistic about the release of British hostages, and the time is becoming right.
The signs both from Beirut and from Tehran seem uniformly good tonight, and senior officials in Iran itself now believe that full diplomatic relations with Britain aren't far off. It may not happen in days, but it ought to be possible in a matter of weeks. But there are signs of a change in Iran's tactical approach. Officials in Tehran now insist that there isn't necessarily any link between the restoration of full relations and the release of the hostages. That too appears to be a good sign. It may mean that hostages could be freed before the negotiations are finished on whether Britain should have an embassy in Tehran and what conditions the diplomats there would work under. When Mr. David Reddaway arrived back from Iran today, he said he had no news about the prospects for the hostages, but he made it clear that he'd raised the issue with the Iranian authorities.
Well, I raised the point we've made before, that we hope that any government that could influence people holding hostages would actually use that influence. And they certainly registered that point.
His visit to Roger Cooper was clearly important in terms of showing Iran's goodwill.
Sorry about the delay.
The choice of Mr. Redaway for the mission to Tehran was a good one. He's a fluent Farsi speaker with a thorough understanding of the country, and he's known in the Foreign Office as someone who can cope well in difficult circumstances. Now, on the basis of his report, the Foreign Office will make up its mind about the conditions on which proper diplomatic relations with Iran ought to be resumed. Almost certainly, Iran will be looking for some political advantage in the difficult peace negotiations with Iraq in Geneva. But Britain believes that it's the Iraqis who've so far been causing the more serious problems, so there shouldn't be any great difficulty in making that clear. And the Iranians are already pleased with last Friday's condemnation by the UN Security Council, spearheaded by the British ambassador, Sir Crispin Tickell, of Iraq's use of poison gas in the Gulf War.
The police and army in Northern Ireland have been clearing up after some of the worst disorder for years. They've faced shootings and petrol bomb attacks, and in one incident in West Belfast, a police station came under machine gun fire. No one has been seriously hurt. The trouble began yesterday after the IRA man Robert Russell was extradited from the Republic of Ireland.
In the 24 hours after Robert Russell was extradited, police reported 56 hijackings, 17 bombings, 23 shooting incidents and nearly 200 attacks on the security forces. The RUC station at New Barnsley in West Belfast came under fire from a heavy machine gun. In all, 11 policemen, 1 soldier and 3 civilians were hurt. In terms of the number of terrorist incidents, it's the worst the city has suffered since the violence at the time of the May's hunger strikes 7 years ago. The police officer in charge of much of the Nationalist Falls and Springfield Road area of West Belfast says it's part of a sustained effort to terrorise the community. Robert Russell's extradition was no more than an excuse.
All of yesterday's events were, I'm entirely satisfied, orchestrated and planned by the Provisional IRA and Sinn Féin. They may claim or may tend to give the impression that Russell perhaps was the reason. That was just the excuse. This day would have come, I'm sure, regardless of whatever reason they dreamt up for it.
Today, the streets have been quiet here as local people and the security forces assess the damage of this latest night of violence.
A German ship carrying more than 2,000 tons of toxic waste is believed to be somewhere off Britain's coast looking for a port at which to unload its cargo. The ship, the Carnival, already has been refused permission to land in South Wales, and the environmental group Friends of the Earth is demanding a wider ban. Jenny Bond reports.
The Carnival is thought to be carrying up to 5,000 drums of toxic waste, part of this consignment that was illegally dumped in the tiny port of Cocoa in western Nigeria by an Italian chemical company. 2 months ago, at the invitation of the Nigerian government, a team from Friends of the Earth went to inspect the drums and found about a third of them in very poor condition. Some, they say, were leaking.
Some of the materials cause cancer. Others of the materials are liable to catch fire very easily. Some of them would actually they have a narcotic effect. The fumes would make you feel very sick. It is highly dangerous waste, extremely dangerous waste, the kind of waste which it is very difficult to deal with properly in an industrialized country, let alone part of the less developed world.
The Nigerians insisted that the waste should be removed, and on July the 30th, the Carnival left Cocoa with its poisonous cargo. It was said to be heading back to Italy. But 12 days later, it arrived at Las Palmas in the Canary Islands. From there, it went to the Spanish port of Cadiz, where it reported it had engine trouble. At the request of the port authority, the Carnival left Cadiz 4 days ago. Then came the news that it had sought permission to berth at Neath in South Wales. That was refused, but the Friends of the Earth say the ship is now hawking its cargo around, looking for another port.
More than 200 seals have died around the British coast since the start of the month, victims of the disease that's sweeping through the seal population. 233 have been reported dead, compared with only 21 over the whole of the previous 3 months. Most of the bodies are being found in East Anglia and Lincolnshire. Athletics fans have had their last chance to see Britain's medal hopefuls in action before next month's Olympics. The crowd at Crystal Palace also had a chance to wish a warm farewell to a former Olympic champion, the sprinter Alan Wells.
The sponsors had been prepared to pay Sebastian Coe £20,000 to run here. he turned it down, avoiding for now any further direct comparisons with those who will be going to Seoul. Steve Cram and Peter Elliott were in the 2,000 metres, and Cram had just that bit more finishing speed. But ominously for both of them, Saïd Waite of Morocco looked just as impressive in the 1,000 metres. In career, he'll be by far the biggest threat. Both Tessa Sanderson and Fatima Whitbread had recovered enough from their respective injuries to take part in the javelin. Whitbread won with a throw just short of 70 metres. But Sanderson was only just behind. Either one of them is again looking capable of taking the gold medal. But the men's 100 metres provided the closest finish. Linford Christie in lane 4 finished in exactly the same time as Thomas Jefferson of the United States. But after a photograph, Jefferson was declared the winner. Out of the first three was the former Olympic champion Alan Wells. This was his last appearance in an individual race, and he received the warmest of ovations from a capacity Crystal Palace crowd.
A children's parade set the rhythm at the start of the Notting Hill Carnival. Hundreds of youngsters turned out in costumes and on floats to launch the two-day street festival. Up to 1 million people were expected, though so far there have been only half as many visitors as last year.
The uncertain weather and fears of possible trouble from criminal gangs combined to provide one of the lowest first-day attendances at Notting Hill for years, estimated at less than 100,000 so far. But those who chose to stay away missed one of the most colourful spectacles Europe's best-known street carnival has provided. The Sunday event is traditionally children's carnival, and this year it has brought an explosion of colour, design, music and dance to an appreciative audience, quick to commandeer the best vantage points. At a nearby school, the huge police control room, where dozens of phones have been scrambled, monitors installed, and the emphasis clearly placed on public safety. The determination to rid Carnival of its sometimes unfortunate image seemed to be paying off.
It's going well. I'm not complacent, but so far we've only had one crime which I could say is attributable to Carnival. That compares with about 50 at an equivalent time last year. Been a lot of cooperation, a lot of common sense, and although it's still very early in the evening, the signs are good at the moment, and I emphasise at the moment.
Tonight then, nothing seems to be detracting revellers from joining in the Carnival mood.
That's it for now. The main news tonight is at 10:10.
Well, a very good evening to you. There are a few thunderstorms this morning over Lincolnshire and Kent, but they're now gone out of the way. They're all connected to this black area of cloud which is running down through the North Sea. It was associated with this weather system here, which is now no longer our concern. It's fading away into the continent. Instead, we've got this run of showery westerly winds, and they're going to be with us for the next 36 hours or so. Now on the radar, starting at 3 o'clock this afternoon, we can see how the showers have developed once again as the day has gone along. Quite a number, in fact, now over northwestern parts of England, and a few running down through the Midlands as well, but not too many on the eastern side of England, and just one or two scattered about in eastern Scotland, but a fair number of showers still to come throughout this evening and tonight. In fact, some lengthier spells of rain likely to turn up over Northern Ireland and the west of Scotland as the night goes along. Now, with fairly clear skies elsewhere, it'll be a fairly chilly night, certainly after the last couple, maybe down to 8 or 9 in some eastern parts of England, where you stay fairly clear. Tomorrow morning then, for many central and eastern parts, it'll be a fairly bright start. There'll be some sunshine around. A lot of showers though in the west and over Scotland as well. Still some heavy ones too. And as we go through towards the middle of the day, those showers becoming rather more widespread, even in the south, but still a good chance on the eastern side of England of staying dry altogether. In any event, later in the day, probably the showers fading away once again down in the south. Temperatures tomorrow, well, on the cool side with the wind being fairly fresh, 19, 66 being about the top. That's it. Bye for now.
Programmes for Sunday evening on BBC One. At 7:15, join Tom O'Connor for the final edition of A Question of Entertainment. That's followed at 7:45 by the return of Howard's Way, with another chance to see the final episode from the last series, when Ken Masters had some grand ideas.
I've always thought one day I'd end up owning a place like this.
At 8:35, First of the Summer Wine, and it's 1939.
Hey up, Foggy! What's that doing out here, though? Why they send plain soldiers?
That's Life at 9:20 is a special holiday edition and features some of the best-loved moments from the last series. Everyman at 10:25 examines the philosophy of confidentiality as new research reveals why the Red Cross chose to remain silent about the Nazi plans to exterminate the Jews. With Dennis O'Neill at 11:15 and Grand Prix at 11:55, that's the lineup for Sunday evening on BBC One.
Over on 2 in just over 10 minutes, Magenta Devine and Shonka Gua are in London for the last of the Rough Guides to Europe, where, amongst other wheezes, they meet Joan Collins' fan club on the comedy circuit and visit Theatreland with Gary MacDonald from EastEnders.